Hi, I'm Dr. Jackson Crawford. I'm an Old Norse specialist, finishing up 2 years of teaching at UC Berkeley before moving home to the University of Colorado Boulder this fall. I'm back today with another video about Norse language and myth, this time on the language side. When I started out this channel in early 2016, one of the type of videos that I was posting were Old Norse lessons in sort of a contiguous order that I thought made sense. It was based roughly on the years when I've taught Old Norse. But it's been quite a while since I uploaded those videos. I've learned a lot about how to make videos, just about sound and use of the board and how to edit things. So I want to go back and kind of remake those. But instead of remaking them with a numerical sequence, calling it lesson 1, 2, 3, 4, I just want to post videos on different topics in Old Norse language and grammar that you can then watch in the order or non-order that might work for you. I have a playlist of these videos that is linked in the video description below, and I'll link it in a card too. In that playlist, the order is roughly what I think the order ought to be, but of course you don't have to follow that. So in this video, what I want to do is just give a brief, or as brief as one can, overview of how nouns work in Old Norse. So that includes just basic things like gender and case for people who may not know languages that involve those concepts, and also the specifics of how gender and case work in Old Norse nouns. And then I want to look at paradigms of common noun types in Old Norse for people who are working on learning the language. So to begin with, the Old Norse language is gendered. Like Spanish or French that has 2 genders, Old Norse has 3, like Latin or German or Old English or Russian. These 3 genders are masculine, feminine, and neuter, and they are arbitrary. So kind of like in Spanish how there's no particular reason why a river is masculine, el río, but a city is feminine, la ciudad. The Old Norse language doesn't have some kind of like reasoning for why elder, fire, is masculine, but Jorð, earth, is feminine, but fjall, mountain, is neuter. There's not some kind of underlying reasoning here. It's fundamentally arbitrary, at least at this stage of the language. The gender of humans does tend to match their actual natural gender. So for instance, a word for king will be masculine, a word for woman will be feminine. But for things outside the human realm, it's basically arbitrary. However, arbitrary does not mean impossible to guess. When you look at a word in Old Norse, you can usually determine what gender it is even without having to look it up. So let's look at some of the characteristics that can help us tell what gender a particular noun is. In this presentation and elsewhere, I use the old-fashioned male and female signs for masculine and feminine to make it take up a little less space on the board, and then I just use an X for neuter. So one characteristic of masculine nouns is that very many of them in their dictionary form, their nominative form, a term I'll get to in a moment, they end in R. So words like elder, fire, staðr, place, and hlutur, thing, are all masculine, and it's pretty easy to tell because they end in that characteristic R. By the way, in this video and in other videos where I discuss Old Norse, I'm using reconstructed Old Norse pronunciation. I have a video that talks about that. It's part of this series. I also have a video on this channel that talks about modern Icelandic pronunciation if you prefer that. However, I like to use reconstructed pronunciation because I think it's more interesting, less anachronistic, and it's easier to learn for people who are coming at this cold. Another type of masculine noun ends in I. So your type like Loki, the trickster, Timi, time, Bani, bane, or killer, these are also masculine nouns, as are most nouns that end in I, with an exception that I'll get to in a moment. Feminine nouns will almost always lack that R at the end, and if they are monosyllabic words that have this hook O vowel, that will be characteristically definitely feminine. So a word like Jorð, earth, sok, case, thing, sake, whole, hull, these are all feminine nouns. as will be other monosyllabic nouns that don't have an R at the end and have this hook O vowel. Most nouns that end in the letter A, are feminine as well. This is characteristic of many Indo-European languages. So kona, woman or wife, saga, story, and kyrkja, church, these are all feminines and pretty recognizable as such. Now I mentioned there was an exception to nouns with I being masculine. Many feminine nouns that are abstract concepts end in I. So if a noun is an abstract concept and it ends in I, that may very well be feminine. In which case, you have examples like fröði, wisdom or learning, gleði, gladness, happiness, cheerfulness, and skadi, the name of a goddess. These are feminine. That's actually kind of an exception because it's not an abstract concept, but there's a few feminine names that end in I too. There are also some feminine names that do have the characteristic R that ends in masculines. This is an archaic feature that's gone in most feminine nouns, but is preserved in some feminine names. Be especially watchful for feminine names that end in hilder. Hilder is itself a feminine name, but there's also feminine names like Brunhilder that end, or Gunhilder that end in this. So they may look like masculines at first blush, but they're not. And then there are a few common feminine nouns like neuter, need, emergency, threat that end in that characteristic R as well. Neuter nouns don't necessarily have such defining characteristics as they are just excludable once you figure out that it's not masculine or feminine by the characteristics mentioned. A neuter noun will be a noun that is monosyllabic and has the letter A, the sound A, in its root. So something like fjall, mountain, land, land, these are definitely neuters because they're monosyllables and they have that vowel in the root. Other monosyllabic nouns will typically be neuter, something like skip, ship, but there's nothing about the shape of this that says it couldn't be feminine, because monosyllabic nouns that have a root vowel like I, that's not A or hook O, they can be feminine or neuter, and that's kind of hard to call. You just have to check your dictionary. Then there are basically three neuter nouns that are all paired body parts or conceivable as paired body parts that end in A and could look like feminines to you, but they're not. Just remember, these are commonly talked about paired body parts. Auga, eyes, öra, ears, and then hjarta, heart, which you can think of as a paired body part because of the two lobes. Now, why is gender important? It's not just that the words of different genders in Old Norse have different endings in different cases, which I'll get to in a moment, but also the nouns of different genders govern adjectives and pronouns that are in different forms as well. So you can't use an adjective that's in a masculine form with a feminine noun and vice versa. For example, if we take just the adjective for beautiful, fagur, and we apply it to nouns of different genders, we can see that we get several different forms. If I want to talk about a beautiful fire, that's fagur elder. But if I want to talk about a beautiful woman, she's fagur kona. Notice that the vowel here has changed because of this being a feminine that I'm using it with. And then a beautiful ship, fagur skip. So again, we have an ending that's different. I can't just use fagur, the masculine form, which is what you'd find in the dictionary if you just looked up beautiful in Old Norse. And then even when we add the word the, and we want to say the beautiful fire in fagri elder, notice yet again a different ending has to be used, but then it's a totally different ending than we use with a feminine. In fagra kona, the beautiful woman, or it fagra skip, the beautiful ship. So we have to know the gender of every noun that we're working with, otherwise the endings of the adjectives and pronouns that we're using are going to be wrong. So that's gender. Now let's talk about case. These three sentences that I've written on the board in English are sentences that most speakers of English intuitively know are wrong. Me went to the rodeo with they. Them told I that her was sure here. Him gave I a lecture. This all sounds very weird to a native English speaker. Why? The answer is that the cases are wrong. English does not have case in nouns anymore, but we still have case in pronouns, so that's a useful place to start talking about case in Old Norse. What's the right way to say this? I went to the rodeo with them. as what's happened is, who's the subject? I. The subject form of this pronoun for the first person is I. So that's what I should have used here instead of me. And then the reverse is true. At the end of the sentence, with is a preposition, and the objects of prepositions take the object case, not the subject case, so I should have said them. I went to the rodeo with them. Now that looks natural and right. It's a difference of case. The sentence might be understandable without the case done right. You know, me went to the rodeo with they sounds probably understandable, but it sounds like I'm maybe 2 years old. I don't know. I'm not around kids. I don't know when they start talking. But it's, you know, it doesn't sound intelligent. It doesn't sound right. Similarly here, I needed to use the subject form they, not the object form them, for the subject of the verb told. And of course I need the object form here because I'm the one who's told, so they told me. And I need to use the subject form here, she, not her, because she is the subject of was. So this needs to be they told me that she was sure here. And then down here, him gave I a lecture. Again, him needs to be in its subject form he because it's the subject of the verb gave. And then I, since it's the object of gave, needs to be in the object form me. He gave me a lecture. So the reason I belabor this point, because these sentences probably seem kind of obvious to you, is because though this is obvious to us in pronouns, it's not necessarily obvious to us in nouns. If I go and I replace I and them here with just regular nouns, let's say a man went to the rodeo with, I don't know, the cousins. If we switch those around in English and say, the cousins went to the rodeo with a man, we don't have to change the nouns, but in Old Norse we do. The noun will have a separate subject form like I, and a separate object form like me. The cousins will have a separate subject form like I, and a separate object form like me, or separate subject form like they, a separate object form like them. We have to remember that we're in a sort of different world with Old Norse, and that these distinctions matter, and they will make words look different. Not completely alien different, but different, especially in endings and sometimes vowels. And it's useful in reading or writing Old Norse. It constantly amazes me how many people want to write Old Norse. That if you can't figure out what the case should be, try replacing it with a pronoun. If you're trying to write a sentence in Old Norse like, a man went to the rodeo with the cousins, and you can't decide what case man and cousin should be, turn them into pronouns. He went to the rodeo with them, and that should give you a little bit more clarity. So there are subjects of verbs, of course. Any given verb has a subject, at least an implicit subject. The subject of went is I, or a man. The subject of told is they here. The subject of was is she. The subject of gave is he. In any given sentence, you want to look for the subject. It'll probably be there. And the subject is in what we call the nominative case. If you're going through a sentence and you can't figure out what case the one noun is, or one pronoun, it is almost certainly nominative. So nominative occurs not just in the subjects of verbs, but also in the predicates, so after the verb, of verbs like was and become, where no action is happening. So for instance, if I say like, I am a professor, I is nominative and a professor is too, because there's no action in this verb, there's no object of am. Am is just an equal sign. It just says this is what the subject is, right? It just renames the subject. I am a professor. I was a happy man. I became bitter. So verbs like be, become, they don't change the case of a noun or adjective on the other side. So nominative is what you'll most often find. Next most frequently encountered case is the accusative case. The accusative is the case of the direct object. So there's a subject, there's a verb, and then what was the verb done to? What did you give? What did you see? What did you take? Who did you hit? That kind of thing. The answer to those questions will be in the accusative. So he gave me a lecture. What's in the accusative? Well, what did he give? He gave me a lecture, so lecture is accusative. I met my friend. Who did I meet? I met my friend, so my friend is accusative. I have an idea. What do you have? I have an idea, so an idea is accusative. It answers the question, what did the subject verb? Related to accusative, but different, with different endings in Old Norse, is the dative. So if accusative is the direct object, the dative is the indirect object. So there's a dative in this sentence too. He's nominative, the subject of the verb. A lecture is accusative. What did he give? He gave a lecture. Me is dative because it's what it was given to. Dative occurs very often in verbs of giving. In English, we have sort of a fossil of the dative because we often don't use the preposition to here. Right? In English, I can say, I gave a lecture to her, but I can also say, I gave her a lecture. That her, without the to, is sort of a fossil of the dative in English. And like those fossilized dative expressions in English, in Old Norse, if we want to write a dative sentence like a sentence with a dative like this, the dative will come before the accusative. So, for instance, han gav mer. I don't know what I would say for lecture in Old Norse, maybe just talk. Words, whatever. But this would be nominative. This is dative because that's what's being given to. And this mole word speech is accusative. Dative and accusative also often occur as the objects of prepositions. Words like with, in, on, under, over, these kind of words. I had a middle school teacher who told me that you should remember prepositions or any words that fill up the blank in the bee flew blank the tree. It may not make logical sense, the bee flew under the tree, but it will make grammatical sense. So words that fill in that blank, the bee flew blank the tree, those are prepositions. Prepositions typically take an object that's in the accusative or the dative. You have to learn which case each preposition takes, and sometimes it'll take either one depending on context. But for instance, the preposition fro, which means from, takes a dative. The preposition about, takes an accusative. So you have to know those rules too, but most good dictionaries of Old Norse or good learning programs will point out which case each particular preposition takes. And then there's one more case in Old Norse. Other languages have more cases. And that is the genitive. Mostly, the genitive is a case that shows possession. In English, we have a very strong residual fossil of the genitive case in the form of the apostrophe S that we add to words when they're possessive. So when we talk about the eagle's cry, right, that's genitive, eagles, the cry of the eagle. The buffalo's stampede. Then buffaloes is in genitive, it's possessive, it's the stampede of the buffaloes. In English, genitives can be rephrased with of, right? So you can say both Jackson's book and the book of Jackson, right? It sounds odd maybe one way or the other way, but they're basically equivalent in English. In Old Norse, you cannot replace them with of. You have to use that possessive construction. And in masculine nouns, the possessive, the genitive, is indicated by an S, usually, just like the possessive in English, which is a fossil of the exact same form of the masculine nouns, genitive or possessive form. So for instance, if you want to talk about a man's house, in Old Norse, hus, mans, hus is house, mans is the genitive of the word for man or person, mother. Notice, of course, that in Old Norse, the genitive or possessive usually follows what it possesses. So in English, of course, this would be flipped, right? Man's house. But in Old Norse, it's man, the possessive comes after, typically. Genitive also has a strange role in Old Norse relative to other languages. It is the object of one very important preposition, the preposition till. Which means to, in the sense of travel to. So I moved back to Colorado, or I traveled to Los Angeles, or we sailed our ship to Norway, or whatever. The object of that to is going to be in the genitive. This is probably because till was originally a noun with a meaning something like goal or destination. So it was like you were saying, we traveled destination of Norway, goal of Norway, and this became reinterpreted as a preposition that took a genitive object rather than a noun that had a genitive kind of explanation of the destination. Random little historical asides. Now, typically, whenever I write out a paradigm of a noun, when I write out a noun, its nominative, accusative, dative, and genitive forms, I actually do it in the order nominative, accusative, genitive, dative. The reason I do that is that I was originally trained as an Indo-Europeanist, and most grammars of old Indo-European languages go in that order. Grammars of Sanskrit, Greek, Old English, things like that I was used to. So if I write it in a different order, I'm going to get screwed up, and I'm going to, just instinctively go back to this order, so I'm not going to do that to you. But you'll also see reference works on Old Norse or Modern Icelandic that go in the order nominative, accusative, dative, genitive. That seems to be the order preferred in Iceland today. So just be careful and make sure that whatever chart you're looking at, you know what order the cases are being presented in. So when I say that nouns take different forms depending on what case they're in, I mean typically that it's a matter of endings. So for instance, let's just take a fairly typical masculine noun, and let's look at what its endings would be in these different cases. Here is a paradigm, a presentation of all the grammatical cases of a typical masculine noun, elder, fire. So most masculine nouns will have these same endings. The nominative is elder, the accusative is eld, the genitive is elds, the dative is eldi, the nominative plural, notice this is different if we're talking about multiple fires, is eldar, the accusative is elda, genitive elda, dative eldu. So if a fire is burning in my neighborhood, elder is burning in my neighborhood. I see a fire. I see eld, accusative. What do you see? Accusative eld. A fire's ashes are smoldering here. The ashes of the fire, elds, a fire's ashes, possessive. I gave the fire my whole heart. I gave eldi my whole heart. Is what did you give it to? I gave it to the fire. Fires are burning at the distance, eldar. These are multiple fires, but they're subjects of the verb burning. I can't see the fires. Elda, plural. What do you see? Fires, or not see. The fires destruction, the destruction of multiple fires, can be seen here. That would be possessive, genitive plural, elda. I gave the sacrificial fires my offerings. What did you give the offerings? So they're accusative. What did you give them to the fires? So that's dative, eldum. Any other given masculine noun that ends in R, like elder, will typically have these same endings. So it's not just a guessing game where you're not sure what a particular word will look like in different cases. Most masculine nouns look basically the same. Let's look at another one. How about vikingur, Viking, just to give you another example. As you'll see here, the endings that I put on vikingur are the same as those that I put on elder. So when you look up an Old Norse noun in the dictionary, what you're going to see is its nominative subject form, elder or vikingur, in the case of these typical masculine nouns. But then to use it in a sentence, you have to make sure that you're using it correctly. You have to knock off that R for the accusative, viking. Add an S to that for possessive, genitive, vikings. Add an I for dative, vikingi, etc. for the plural too. Not all masculine nouns, including all masculine nouns that end in R, work in exactly this way, but this is a good default way to assume that an unfamiliar masculine noun works. Let's look at one more example of one of these typical masculine nouns before we move on to feminine and neuter. Here's a word that we're all too acquainted with after a couple of years on Earth, sorrow. I also sometimes translate this as agony or misery. Notice exact same endings as with elder. Harmer, harm, harms, harmi, harmar, harma, harma. But notice right here, hormum. Any time that a word has the vowel a, the sound ah in its root, and an ending has the vowel u, it will change that ah to a hook o, to o caudata. Be very watchful for that, because if you were to come across hormum in a Old Norse text and then go and look for hormer in the dictionary, you won't find it. You have to know that that hook o has been turned into that by the action of the u behind it, and you have to look up harmer instead of hormer. We will see that time and again in masculine, neuter, and feminine nouns. This is a universal rule of Old Norse. A u cannot follow an a. The u will turn the a into a hook o. This is called u umlaut or u mutation. Also notice, as we move on to looking at typical feminine and neuter noun paradigms, that all nouns have a genitive plural that ends in a and a dative plural that ends in So I'll include that in all these paradigms, but you don't really have to learn anew. Remember, genitive plural is a, dative plural is That doesn't really vary from noun to noun. So what you're focusing on learning that's different between different types of nouns is these first 6. All right, here is a typical neuter noun. Notice that the endings of the genitive and dative singular, and of course the genitive and dative plural, are the same as those typical masculine nouns. The typical masculine and neuter paradigms are both called a stems in Germanic linguistics. So the last two of the singular, last two of the plural are the same as masculines. What you need to remember is just that the nominative and accusative are the same for neuters. So this is just going to be the same in accusative, skip, skip. And unless the root vowel is an a, right, the sound ah, then the plural is the same too. So these 4 will be the same for most neuter nouns. It's just skip, skip, skips, skippy, skip, skip, skippa, skipum. But let's look at a neuter noun that does have that vowel ah, the letter a, in its core. This is an unusually long video, so the sun is rising out there, and I don't have my cop Ray-Bans. So here's a noun, a neuter noun that has the ah vowel in its core. Notice the singular looks just like skip, fjall, fjall, fjalls, fjalli. This is mountain. But in the plural, we have this change of ah to hook o, or, as if there were a u here in the plural. There used to be in runic inscriptions from the early Viking Age and earlier, and also in Old English, we can see the u that causes this change. The u is gone, but the change remains. So any neuter noun that has ah, the vowel a in its root, that ah is going to change to hook o, and the nominative and accusative plural. And of course, also in the dative plural, don't forget that this U will also change the A into a hook O. Now let's take a quick look at our typical feminines. Alright, typical feminines. Here's Sveit. This is region or district. Notice these are not very much like the masculines and neuters, which are A stems. These are mixed O-I stems in Germanic linguistics. So notice the nominative, accusative, dative for a noun like this is just the same, Sveit, Sveit, Sveit. The genitive is sveitar, so that R ending rather than the S ending of masculine and neuter. Plural, ir, in nominative and accusative, sveitir, sveitir. Notice only typical masculines have nominative and accusatives that are different. In feminines and neuters, typically the nominative and accusative is the same. And then our typical sveita, sveitum, and the genitive plural and dative plural. But let's look at a feminine that has that core vowel a. Alright, the sun has passed the top of the blinds now. And I was just kidding about the sunglasses. I don't even think I own any. Alright, so here is a feminine noun, jord, earth. When you look this up in the dictionary, you're going to see the nominative, which is this. The core vowel, however, anytime you see that hook O, the true core vowel is a. That hook O is only caused by mutation. There used to be a U in the nominative, accusative, and dative of these typical feminine nouns, and that U has caused the mutation of that A to a hook O, even though the U is not there anymore. So you have to remember that in endings where you have an A or an I, that true core vowel A is going to come back. So that's why you get the same endings as Sveit, but with a mutation between the hook O and the A. The hook O is there if there's no ending, or if the ending is because no endings that used to have a U. The A is there if the ending has A or I. So jord, jord, jardar, jord, jardir, jardir, jarda, jordum. So the large number of feminine nouns like sok and hol that also have that hook O vowel in the root will also have this mutation in their paradigm. Well, I hope this video has helped show you how to take Old Norse nouns and actually use them in sentences. Part of the takeaway message is, of course, that Old Norse is fairly hard. You can't just put a noun into a dictionary and then use the form you find in the dictionary in any place in a sentence. You actually have to change it around and adjust it. It also means that, of course, learning Old Norse, you have to know to expect these alternative forms of words based on how they're used in a sentence. But it is very learnable, and in future videos, I will deal with other types of nouns and, of course, other parts of speech, like adjectives, verbs, pronouns, and etc. For now, from the University of California, Berkeley, I'm wishing you all the best.